Every year in America, 55,000 kids are missing, gone, vanished. We don't know where they went. This statistic is derived from missingkids.com. Law enforcement has been unable to piece together who has taken or who has abducted these children. Police have failed. This has been investigated at the state level. At the federal level, the FBI has prevented deep investigations into these missing kids. We believe this could very well go to the highest level of government. One woman, Nancy Schaefer, died. She was killed, trying to find out why these kids are missing and what is going on in the CPS network.
But all of it is based on money, and that's where it's going to have to be cut off. The federal incentives have got to be cut off and be removed on a federal level in order to get this stopped. We have so many families calling that are absolutely delirious. They are so desperate. They do not know where to turn, and actually, they have no place to turn for help. And of course, parents, the poorer the families are, those are the ones who are targeted because they don't have the wherewithal to fight the system or hire an attorney. And they are just caught up in it, and many of them are because their children are blue-eyed or blonde or exactly what someone wants, and those families are targeted. So it is just heartbreaking as to what is going on and what we've got to do in order to bring this to an end. Some states now that put the children on the internet, and you can just go through their pictures and choose the one you want. And then there are some children that even if you might like to, if a really good person who is really trying to help a child will choose that child, oftentimes then they refuse to let these parents have the child. So if your motives are pure as the driven snow, and you're trying to really help get a child out of that system and give them a new life, oftentimes they won't let the child go. It is one of the most corrupt situations that we could ever have in this country.
I'm going to take a look at an update on the situation of Nancy Schaefer's mysterious death from News from Underground, markcrispinmiller.com. And he goes on to talk about the funeral, and this occurred around April 10th, 2010. There were quite a few people, a gathering, 1,000 people that attended the funeral. And it turns out that the Schaefers were receiving death threats that had accelerated. And there was no indication from the husband, Bruce Schaefer, of him being under any kind of stress to commit such an uncharacteristic act. Nancy Schaefer was completing a video exposing the lack of oversight in Georgia's Department of Family and Child Services, as well as CPS nationally. And that video was never made, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The video was created by William Fain of WilliamFain.com, but he never completed the video. And he took various pieces and was going to edit it, never did. Now, he believed that he knew them very well, and he was convinced their financial problems eventually resulted in the tragedy. Both he and other friends of the family corroborate that Bruce had complained of investment losses, and they received a foreclosure notice on a magnificent home they owned. But there are a lot of unanswered questions that are presented here, and I'm going to read them. Still, many of the couple's friends question whether their financial condition was really severe enough to warrant such an uncharacteristic, drastic action. Burning psychological questions remain, such as why would Bruce decide to kill himself and his wife because he received a foreclosure notice on a home that they already decided to sell 2 months earlier? Why would Bruce consider the couple's financial situation so severe when their assets still appeared to exceed their secured property debt by several $100,000? And if Bruce was under financial stress, why did he not show any signs of it up to and including the evening of the couple's death? Now, if Bruce was under financial stress, why wouldn't he seek help from any or all of his 5 children who loved him and would have helped? Why would Bruce decide to deprive both he and Nancy of seeing the grandchildren who they love so dearly grow up? And why would Bruce knowingly take a drastic action that would devastate the children and grandchildren who loved him so much? Why would Bruce, who was so highly supportive of Nancy's efforts for decades, including her CPS and DFCS work, decide to kill her just at the peak of one of her most important works? And why would Bruce commit such an act that was so against his faith and completely out of character for him to, according to those who knew him best, do such a terrible act? Why would Bruce jeopardize any chance of the family collecting life insurance benefits by committing suicide and killing his wife? Her death ended her search for answers about the CPS network. In no way am I implying that CPS was responsible for her death or for the missing kids in America. I do believe that there may be more to it, though. Nancy published The Corrupt Business of Child Protective Services, a very interesting document with telling information. She goes on to say, I have been stunned by what I've seen and heard from victims all over the state of Georgia. In this report, I am focusing on the Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services, DFCS. However, I believe Child Protective Services nationwide has become corrupt, and that the entire system is broken almost beyond repair. I'm convinced parents and families should be warned of the dangers. The Department of Child Protective Services, known as the Department of Family and Children's Service, DFCS, in Georgia, and other titles in other states, has become a protected empire built on taking children and separating families. This is not to say that there are not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. This report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping, ineffective policies, and DFCS, who does not remove a child or children when a child is enduring torment and abuse. In one county in my district, I arranged a meeting for 37 families to speak freely and without fear. These poor parents and grandparents spoke of their painful, heart-wrenching encounters with DFCS. Their suffering was overwhelming. They wept and cried. Some did not know where their children were and had not seen them in years. I had witnessed the Gestapo at work, and I witnessed the deceitful conditions under which children were taken in the middle of the night out of hospitals, off of school buses, and out of homes. And in this document, she goes on to say that all parents are capable of making mistakes, and that making a mistake does not mean your children are always to be removed from the home. Even if the home is not perfect, it is home, and that's where a child is the safest and where he or she wants to be with family. And that parenting classes, anger management classes, counseling referrals, therapy classes, and on are demanded of parents with no compassion by the system, even while they're at work and while their children are separated from them. This can take months or even years, and it emotionally devastates both children and family. Parents are victimized by the system that makes a profit for holding children longer and bonuses for not returning children. The caseworkers and social workers are oftentimes guilty of fraud. They withhold evidence, they fabricate evidence, and they seek to terminate parental rights. However, when charges are made against them, the charges are ignored. And that the separation of families is growing as a business because local governments have grown accustomed to having taxpayer dollars to balance their expanding budgets, their ever-expanding budgets. And the Child Protective Service and juvenile court can always hide behind a confidentiality clause in order to protect their decisions and keep the funds flowing. There should be open records and court watches. Look who is being paid. Now check this out. Under the Adoption and the Save Families Act, set in motion by President Clinton, they offered cash bonuses to the states for every child they adopted out of foster care. In order to receive the adoption incentives bonuses, local child protective services need more children. They must have merchandise, children that sell, and you must have plenty of them so the buyer can choose. Some counties are known to give a $4,000 bonus for each child adopted and an additional $2,000 for a special needs child. Employees work to keep the federal dollars flowing. Then that there is double dipping. The funding continues. As long as a child is out of the home, when a child is in foster care, is placed with a new family, then adoption bonus funds are available. When a child is placed in a mental health facility and is on 16 drugs per day, like two children of a constituent of hers, more funds are involved. that there are no financial resources and no real drive to unite a family and to help keep them together. At the heart of a lot of the complaints against CPS is the money trail, that they get money from the government when they place a child in foster care or in adoption. This came out in 2008, an article by Samantha Torrance in the Digital Journal called "Did Texas Child Protective Services See $$ Signs or Abuse?" And she's referring to the FLDS raid on a compound in 2008 where over 400 kids were taken from their 38 mothers, and all of this could have been a money trail that CPS was looking for. Remember, those kids were all returned to their parents and nothing ever happened of it. But in 1997, Bill Clinton signed into law the Adoption and Safe Families Act. We'll take a look at that in just a second. The act was designed to give incentives for children to find permanent homes outside of the foster care system. And this offered between $4,000 and $6,000 given to the state agencies per child adopted. And we're going to take a look at the bill, and we'll show you how it leads to abuse. Okay, this is the bill 105th Congress put together in 1997 to promote the adoption of children in foster care. A serious problem. We're going to do a word search for 4,000. That's the number that was mentioned. Here it is. Adoption incentive payment. Okay, in general, except as provided in paragraph 2, the adoption incentive payment payable to the state for a fiscal year under this section shall be equal to the sum of $4,000 multiplied by the amount, if any, by which the number of foster child adoptions in the state during the fiscal year exceeds the base number of foster child adoptions for the state for the fiscal year, and add an additional 2,000 multiplied by that amount which the number of special needs adoptions in the state during the fiscal year exceeds the base number of special needs adoptions for the state for the fiscal year. This is a very odd number, and it could lead to $40,000 for Ohio, just like the previous article stated. It said that she had heard from her mother-in-law that children's services workers in Ohio are paid a $40,000 bonus per child that's removed from their home. It's entirely possible under this bill, and folks, this could very well be the reason why countless children in America are being taken from their families. Ending the abuses at CPS is a start, but now let's look back 20 years at other abuses. In 1993, a film crew from Yorkshire Television in the UK, led by producer Nick Gray and director Tim Tate, went to Omaha, Nebraska in the U.S. to make a documentary about an alleged pedophile ring. Funded by the Discovery Channel in USA, their proposed film would first be broadcast in the UK and Ireland as part of Yorkshire Television documentary. In Omaha, the film crew discovered the machinations of a vast operation functioning throughout the country, providing children to the wealthy and the political establishment for molestation, drug trafficking, and blackmail. A year later, in 1994, the documentary Conspiracy of Silence was to air in the UK. During final editing, with the first broadcast approaching, the Discovery Channel inexplicably withdrew support and reimbursed Yorkshire Television the $500,000 it cost to make. To this day, the documentary remains unaired. What follows is an unpolished, yet coherent, rough cut of that documentary.
Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
John de Camp lays the blame for the contamination of Boys Town on the one-time leader of the National Black Republican Council, Larry King.
Larry King was the fastest rising black star in the entire Republican Party of the United States during all of the 1980s. And he was also one of the most evil individuals in this country in terms of being a dealer of children, in terms of being a thief, 40 million that they documented he stole, and in terms of using and compromising and corrupting one after another politicians.
The base for his network was a small people's bank in Omaha, Nebraska, the Franklin Federal Credit Union. Larry King was its general manager. From 1979, Larry King developed close commercial ties to Boys Town, and Boys Town youngsters were sent to work for his companies. Paul Banassi was a victim of King's abuse. He was also sent by King to lure Boys Town youngsters off campus.
We used to just drive around and go up toward a home, and then we used to do some of the scavenger hunts with picking up some of the kids. You know, just kind of win their confidence, become friends with them for a while. Start inviting them to the parties. The kids were 10 years old or older.
Despite the investigation, Larry King remained free to feed his pedophilic parties with child victims. But in 1988, a routine review brought the Boys Town cases to the attention of Nebraska's State Foster Care Review Board.
And the information presented to the Foster Care Review Board, either via the telephone reports, the personal reports, or the reports we reviewed, Larry King's name was consistently present as someone that the youth were making allegations against. I mean, I turned that information over to authorities, and nothing happened. I would say we handed over at least a foot-high amount of material. Generally speaking, the allegations were ignored.
Omaha police now accept that Larry King may have been abusing children.
Good morning, Roberta.
Those perpetrators named by the children formed a ring of rich and powerful pedophiles in Omaha. Men from industry, politics, the media, even the police. But King's extravagance attracted the attention of the Internal Revenue Service. As a result, on April the 11th, 1988, the Franklin Credit Union was raided and closed by the FBI. King was arrested, and a federal investigation showed he'd stolen $40 million from Franklin. But the FBI's inquiries were secret, and evidence of King's sex ring was quickly covered up.
We were appalled. It was incredible. It's incredible what these kids went through, I think.
I was shocked when I walked in. There was a kid, I would say about 15 years old, out in the middle of the room. One guy was standing in front of him. He was bent over, and the other guy was like reaching under him, playing with his nipples, while a guy whom Jeff told me was a police officer shoving beads up his rectum.
The police officer was shoving beads up his rectum?
Yes.
Everything, I mean, from just, touching to, fruit, squash, huge squash, that big around, stuck into you.
Larry King was, I would say, the center of transporting the children around the country. The airplanes were usually in his name, at least in his name. They were paid for by Larry King.
And they didn't ask me very much about Larry King or even Alan Bear at all. They treated the allegations that I made about the people who abused me almost like a joke.
The information did not come our way. It was given, as I said, to the FBI and Nebraska State Patrol. They conducted their own investigations of the information. The stories were of such significance that the investigators first wanted to prove the accuracy of the stories. As they set about the investigation of the initially three, and then a fourth person were telling the stories, as the investigation developed, it became obvious to the investigators that the information was not accurate, that in fact it was an entire conspiracy of allegations, none of which had any truth to them.
I was very disappointed with the way the FBI and law enforcement treated the victims. They, in fact, turned them into the offenders, so to speak. And instead of taking the evidence that was delivered to them by the victims and interrogating the persons whom the victims identified, they seemed to bear down and try to get the victims to change their story.
Troy Bonner was brought in for questioning by the FBI.
The FBI's attitude was, just no, these kind of things don't happen. But from the first interview when I went, and realized they don't believe anything I'm saying, they were just appalled. But I realized what that look in their eye was back then. It was fear. It was fear of I had witnessed, firsthand things that would, destroy this city. People, a position, what I mean? It's not going to be believed, they said. It will not be believed. You will be found guilty of perjury, and they weren't telling me maybe. They were saying, there's no way. You go on with this story, you're going to jail. That was said to me direct.
You literally have to have bricks for brains to take on the FBI in this country. And that's exactly what you have to do this properly. They now, in my opinion, in my investigation, are the architects of the cover-up.
As Gary Caradori and Karen Ormiston sought out new witnesses on the streets of Omaha, they found themselves under constant threat.
He even said he got one step ahead of them this time. He told us about this book. It was like addresses, telephone numbers, names. He said if they knew you had it, they'd kill him.
On July the 11th, 1990, Gary Caradori and his 8-year-old son, AJ, were flying home from Chicago. They had watched the All-Stars baseball game, and Caradori had been pursuing new leads.
Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board are in Harold Cameron's cornfield trying to determine what caused this private plane to crash, killing its 2 occupants.
The federal investigation was never able to discover what tore the plane apart.
There are things missing from the plane. His briefcase is missing. Again, we'll never know what all was missing because I don't know what he had with him. I don't know what he did in Chicago. He may have had information he was coming back with.
Within 24 hours of the tragedy, FBI agents impounded all records of the investigation. Gary Caradori's death pricked Troy Bonner's conscience. He promised Sandy that he would recant his recantation and tell the truth.
I set the record straight. I was, going to do it, and would, the truth would come out, and somebody would be held accountable for his death. And then at the funeral I had seen, FBI guys, and they looked at me. I was supposed to meet Senator Obetz and Schmidt for lunch after the funeral. And, that's when I decided, I told my mom, we're not going to do the lunch. We're going to hightail it out of Lincoln now.
The effect of Gary's crash on the investigation, I think, in effect, put an end to anybody else coming forward with sensitive information like this.
By the FBI. But when his brother Sean died in an inexplicable gun accident, Troy and his family were convinced they'd been sent a warning message.
And they killed him just flat out, right? Somehow, professionally, made something happen, to shut me up.
The purpose of Sean's death? To instill fear. And it worked.
In July 1991, Alicia Owen was convicted of perjury. Her sentence was between 9 and 25 years.
I can't find a case in the history of this country where some kid got sentenced to 25 or 30 years in prison for something like this. If you were going to pick a what I call a tell sign, something that says something fishy about the whole thing, it was in the sentencing itself. For some reason, they had to send a signal to every kid who was a potential witness. My opinion again. A signal so loud and clear, if you dare to come forward, if you dare to talk, watch what happens.
3 months later, Larry King was jailed for the $40 million fraud. He was given a 15-year sentence, 10 years less than Alicia Owen.
Every victim witness who stepped forward in any way, or even was a potential witness that somebody heard about, has either been killed, put in jail under some theory or other, terrified or run out of the state, discredited. Every perpetrator, even the convicted ones, have been treated as conquering heroes. Obviously, the FBI was protecting something a lot more significant than a bunch of old pedophiles having improper relations with little boys. They were protecting something a lot more significant than a bunch of drug peddlers. They were protecting, in my opinion, they were protecting some very prominent politicians, some very powerful and wealthy individuals associated with those politicians and the political system, up to and including the highest political people in this entire country.
See how pure evil's just right out in the open now, like it's no big deal.